Friends. I just want to take a few minutes and share a couple of thoughts with you tonight, since we're still not able to be together. If you know me, if you've heard me preach or teach or talk or blog or any of the stuff that I do, one of the things that I hope that you know about me is that I'm a little bit stark raving mad about the idea our church needs to be obsessively focused on Jesus. We need to be Jesus people. That's why we're Burns Church of Christ. It's who we want to be. And I believe that for a lot of reasons. One is because when churches don't focus on Jesus, that's when all of the bad stuff happens. That's when everything goes wrong. Churches that don't focus on Jesus are churches that divide. Churches that focus on Jesus are churches that don't divide, because that gives them some perspective to realize whether you eat in the building or not isn't as important as, Jesus or whoever wears pants or whatever the color of the paint is or whatever. Jesus is the most important conversation we can be having. And if we understand that we should focus at Jesus, it just kind of has this way of making the other stuff not quite so important. That's why we need to focus on Jesus. Beyond that, in the everyday life of all of us, Christians who are people who are really and truly and crazily focused on Jesus are the people who are most productive and good for the world. Christians who are focused on Jesus aren't the ones who are bombing abortion clinics. They're not the ones who are starting crusades or picketing funerals. On the contrary, people who are focused on Jesus are focused on loving God and loving others and helping people come to know him. They're constantly thinking about, how will this work? How can I show this to you? How can I love this person? And so all this other stuff tends to just melt away if we get this right. So I think you understand why I think it's so important that we are obsessively focused on Jesus. In simpler terms, what could possibly be better for us to pay attention to, right? I mean, he's the best king. He's the best friend. He is the person who loves you more than anyone else who has ever loved you, and he loves you perfectly. Our parents love us, but they always write some sort of damage on us. He is the only one who doesn't. He's perfect. He's really and truly perfect. So what better thing, what better person could there be to pay attention to than Jesus? Yet so often we find a way, even at church, to pay attention to something else. What color's the carpet? What's this person doing? What's that person doing? Whispers, gossip, complaints, grumbling, the thermostat. There's all of this sort of garbage that we pay attention to. That's not Jesus. We need to pay attention to Jesus. So it burns starting on October 20th. That's the Wednesday after everybody is back from fall break. We think the COVID numbers are going down in our community, so we think that's going to help a lot. On October 20th, and our Wednesday class is at 10:30 in the morning and 6:45 in the evening, we're going to study the life of Christ together to help us focus on Jesus. Now, we've studied the life of Christ together before it burns. So if you've been with us a few years, I want you to know this is not the same study that you have already done. This is something different. The last time we did this, we kind of worked chronologically through the birth to the death and the resurrection of Jesus. This time, we're going to do what I'm calling a four-dimensional look at Jesus. We're going to look at Jesus 4 times, once through each gospel. Rather than flattening the gospels all into one big ball of Play-Doh, I want us to look at Jesus as he is presented in each one of the gospels, because each one of the gospels writes about him a little bit differently and helps us see him just a little bit differently. In Mark, we will see Jesus as a man of action, as the bearer of good news. Mark just says, here's the gospel, here's the good news, and it starts telling us about Jesus. In Matthew, we're going to see Jesus as the fulfillment of all of the promises God has ever made, the continuation of the story of Abraham, where God said to Abraham, through you, I will bless everyone. And Jesus is that one who blesses everyone. We're going to see how God began this and how God is bringing it to completion, the culmination of Israel in one person. In Luke, we're going to see Jesus as the friend of the outcast. We're going to see him with his hands dirty. We're going to see him praying constantly, hanging out with the wrong people constantly, ticking off the right people. Luke's a lot of fun, I think. And in John's gospel, we really and truly see Jesus as divine. Not that we don't in Matthew and Mark and Luke, but in John's gospel, we see him as the Word who is present at creation. We see him as the Lamb who is provided in Isaac's place. We see him as the one who takes the vessels of purification that the Jews would have used to prepare themselves, and he turns them into celebratory wine at a wedding. We're going to see signs that point him as king over all creation. We're going to see Jesus. We're going to pay attention to Jesus, and that's going to be really good for him, good for us. Now, we're going to look at him closely because so many people think they know Jesus. A lot of times people basically think that Jesus is Mr. Rogers in the Middle East. But remember, Jesus didn't get crucified by telling people to be nice and to be good neighbors. He did tell people those things, but that's not the message that God Jesus killed. Have you ever noticed how if you pay attention to Jesus, the powers and the authorities viewed him as threatening? They viewed him as subversive. I would hazard to guess that if I asked the church to come up with 10 words per person to describe Jesus, subversive and threatening wouldn't make anyone's lists. Yet that's how the Pharisees viewed him. In some sense, that's how Pilate viewed him. So maybe we need to look at Jesus a little bit more closely if we're going to see him as they saw him. I'm getting ahead of myself because this is the stuff we're going to talk about for the entire school year. Again, we're going to start the Wednesday after fall break is over, October 20th, 10:30 a.m., 6:45 p.m. We'll spend the rest of the school year focusing on Jesus, getting to know Jesus through each of the Gospels. But before I let you go, I want you to think about one more thing with me today. What do you pay attention to? Now, there are a lot of things you could answer that question. You get up in the morning and you pay attention to the alarm clock, unfortunately. You pay attention to how you look. Well, most of you do. I guess I don't. You pay attention to what you've got to do at your job or your boss or that email. A lot of us spend a lot of time on these dumb things. It's dinged twice while I've been trying to record this call. We pay attention to social media and we pay attention to the trends. And a lot of people pay attention to celebrities and to the gossip about them. What do you pay attention to? Not just what do you encounter, but what do you focus on? What do you look at and really think about? When you drive, you're always paying some attention to what you're doing while you drive the car. Well, I hope, and I've been in Nashville enough times, I don't know that that's always true, but that's part of the idea. Some part of your brain is occupied with the task of driving the car, but you can pay attention to a lot of things. You can pay attention to how you're driving or the noises that the car makes. You can pay attention to the scenery outside. I love driving in the mountains of East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. It's probably dangerous because while you're driving, it's so easy to pay attention to what you see up there instead of what you're actually doing. You can pay attention to the radio and you can sing that song and forget that the people next to you at the traffic light can see you dancing in the car. Or you can pay attention to the way other people are driving. That guy who cut you off and who passed everyone on the right to get in front of you when the interstate slowed down, and that person who's a horrible person, and where did they learn to drive, and they're horrible and they're evil and they should be shot and court-martialed and sent to the Russian front. What do you pay attention to when you drive? I know you're paying attention in some sense to all of those things, but it is really easy for us not to pay full attention to the right things. Magicians are able to surprise us and delight us by managing what we pay attention to. They hold up the cards over here and you're working so hard to figure out what's happening to that 3 of spades that you don't pay attention at all to the fact that he has the cards in his other hand. You don't know where the rabbit in the hat comes from. There's even a phrase that describes some of this. It's called attentional blindness, and magicians exploit this tendency of the human brain to make it where the tricks work, because they know if we're really paying attention to this, we don't see that. I think that the devil knows the same trick. He knows that we can't pay attention to everything all the time. And if he can get us to focus on some things, he can cause us to miss some other things. If I am constantly mad about what's going on in Washington, and there's plenty of reasons for that. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's corruption, there's wickedness, there's all sorts of things. But if I am paying more attention to that than anything else, you see what happens? I've missed something. I've missed something important. I can miss a lot of some things because I'm so focused on this one particular thing. Several years ago, I figured out if I stopped paying attention to that, my life was happier. A lot of people really pay attention to what's happening on social media. I've talked to so many of our young people who are constantly stressed to make sure that they are presenting the perfect curated version of their life on Instagram for their friends. And they want to make sure that they're liked and followed and blah, 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 blah. And they're missing what's happening right in front of them. There's a lot that's wrong in the world. And I can spend a lot of time thinking about what's wrong with crime or what's wrong with anything. And I can pay attention to that and miss everything. What do you pay attention to? I'm not asking you to stick your head in the sand and ignore all of life. No. not asking you to totally withdraw from society. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm asking you today is to make sure that you're paying most attention to Jesus, focusing on him. Yeah, you're going to see that other stuff kind of in your peripheral vision, but if you're focused on him, all of that stuff will stay in its right place. He is your focus. He is your target. What goes wrong if you miss this? Well, do you remember what happened to Peter when he was walking on water and he took his eyes off of Jesus and started paying attention to the waves? That's when he began to sink. Or Elijah in the Old Testament, that great hero of God. He has this showdown with the prophets of Baal and Asheroth on Mount Carmel, and he is in this devastating victory, right? But after that, he starts paying attention to Jezebel's threat, the bounty she puts on his head. And because he's paying attention to that, he forgets that he serves a God who literally just delivered him from nearly 1,000 people who wanted him dead. He pays attention to the threat and not the blessing. I think that's what happens to us too. So I want to close this little video, this devotional, this idea, whatever you want to call this, with one simple scripture. This is Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 through 9. And here's what God tells you and me to pay attention to. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. That's what you need to pay attention to. It is easy to pay attention to what's wrong. It's like a gunshot in the night. It turns your head towards it. You respond almost reflexively. But it is a Christian discipline to intentionally pay attention to what is right. And of course, the most right thing, the most right person in the history of the universe has a name, and you know it. It's Jesus. So this week, see if you can't restore what you pay attention to. Divert a little bit of attention away from what's wrong and towards the one that's right. I think you'll find that you'll be happier and you'll be better and you'll be more helpful to a broken world than you ever were when you paid attention to what's wrong. That's your challenge for this week. And that's your invitation to join us in a couple of weeks when we begin our study, Focus on Jesus. Thanks for joining me today.